resume recording. Perfect. Okay. So I had some notes and a rough outline, but then I thought probably the most important thing is that we just have a good conversation, really.
Mm,
So to get started on that, I thought I would start from going way back to when I was 5 years old. My favorite question was why?
mm,
And I used to ask why, whatever anyone said to me. And I found out that apart from this being a good way to annoy the adults, a lot of the adults and teachers, when I asked this why question, they couldn't actually answer me. And then it dawned on me that, hang on a minute, a lot of these questions they don't actually know the answer to. Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that?
mm,
And that curiosity stayed with me. And I know you've talked about being told off for asking questions too. So
mm,
I'd love to start there and the connection between curiosity, questioning, and what it means to be human.
mm. Wow, kind of a big, broad topic jumping
Yeah, I don't
in.
do the small talk, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what's a good angle to jump in here. I mean, first of all, I can resonate with you on the questions front.
Mhm,
I remember not just being a child and being told off, but also being a teenager and young adult as well.
mhm,
And I think the challenge as well is people didn't know the answer to the questions and somehow maybe felt ashamed by that and decided that they were going to punish me for asking the question in the first place. And it's an interesting one because I consider questions that we don't have answers to be some of the most interesting conversations.
mhm,
And in fact, we know, why would you explore questions that you know the answer to always? And I'm not sure if that's actually a belief that everybody holds. Sometimes people feel like, oh wow, it's too big a question, I couldn't answer, and they feel maybe some imposter syndrome or something like that. So
mhm,
I
mhm.
do wonder if there maybe is a different mindset happening for certain people around this. The ability to be curious is one of humility at some level. It's to know that there's a lot I don't know and I'm willing to explore and uncover.
Well, yeah, and that brings us to perhaps fear, humility. I mean, there's a lot in that, but what I see is that, especially with children, there's more curiosity there,
Mm,
and we are allowed to play as children and we're allowed to explore. But I think a lot of our education system, it sort of forces that out of us. And then
mhm,
we get to a point somewhere in our schooling where a lot of people, they stop asking those questions for fear of having the wrong answer. And when we come back
mhm,
to communication, for me, or having a good conversation, for me, it's not about me telling people what I know or what I don't know. It's about
mm,
exploring something, exploration, a mutual exploration, a mutual
mm,
journey, going on a journey together and perhaps changing our perception.
mm. Yeah, I agree again. I think we're going to have a lot of agreement in this conversation. Um, the quote that comes to mind to me around this is one from the author Theodore Zeldin, and he's written a beautiful little book about conversation. And he says, good conversation is not just an exchange of ideas, but an opportunity to reshape them. Or it's not, just shuffling cards; it's creating new cards. And I love that idea of like, we're not just taking one piece of information and me giving it to you, but actually the act of conversing and dialogue is recreating that material, that like those ideas, those perspectives together, something that you can't get without the other person.
Yeah. I mean, I just think the best conversations I've ever had are those ones where it's created a change, a shift in
Hmm.
mindset. Um, those times where I've actually said to myself, wow, I never thought about that. I never thought
Mm,
about that. And I always feel sort of a sense of gratitude. And also there's a bit of awe and sort of wonder there that I don't know all the answers, and I'm looking at your background there as well
Mm,
with the sort of Earth and the universe, and
mm,
the amount we know and what we don't know. So I'm wondering what it is that stops people from getting to that place of being able to exploring the unknown, exploring those frontiers of our knowledge, perhaps.
mm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think it goes back to something I was saying a little bit earlier about feeling like an imposter or feeling like people don't know enough things. I think, we're all kind of trying to protect our face when we're in interaction. We don't want to come across as stupid or not intelligent or not knowing around things. And so we tend to stick to familiar subjects. And yeah, and I find this is actually interesting. Some people I train in conversation, it comes up a lot, this fear. And I think I have a slightly different viewpoint on it in that if I meet somebody who is an expert in something I know nothing about, I'm sure there's a little bit of like desire to be seen as competent, but I'm like, wow, this is a great opportunity to learn. I'm gonna double down on my curiosity and my questioning and explore. And usually people are very happy and excited to share things that they know about. And again, I wonder if there's a different kind of mindset going on here. And yeah, maybe this links as well somehow to the personality tests around, ocean and openness is one of the first ones there, and openness probably has a strong correlation with exploration, desires to, and maybe more people are more interested in that, and a lot of the time people who are low in openness perhaps fear fear the unknown, fear what they don't know and can't grasp.
And but again, then I'm thinking back to childhood and thinking how a child has to be open and has to be have that openness to learn
Mm,
and understand the world. And then it sort of does. Some people are able to keep it alive for a lifetime, but it's very few, and it's often those people. The people we celebrate are often those people who can keep that openness going for a
mm,
lifetime. And often, when we call someone a genius, you see those traits of that openness to exploring and not making their own assumptions concrete, but then
mm,
being able to step out and look at it from a different angle.
mm,
So I'm always fascinated because on the education side, and then I mean I know you do coaching as well, and that's part of education in a way. But how we keep that alive and how we make that,
mm,
I mean, is it even possible for that to be something that all of us have rather than just these few people that we label as geniuses?
mm. Yeah, he's asking if it's innate or if it's a skill. Well, I think it's a skill. Maybe there's some likelihood of having higher traits of it, but most definitely something you can practice. And that's just something that I think there's a little bit of a formula that one can use to help you be more curious. And the first part of it is to notice more. I think we often forget to look around and to pay attention to be able to point out things in our environment, things we notice about other people, things we notice about ourselves. And once you start noticing and, making statements to actually like verbalize what it is that you're noticing, it becomes much easier to then ask a question relating to that. I remember starting a kind of unusual conversation many years ago in a co-working space. It was the first day there, and I was looking around the space and I saw these plants that were hanging upside down. And I just noticed and was like, oh, these plants are hanging upside down. I just said it out loud at the table. And the guy opposite me said, oh, yeah, they are. And then I suddenly had that thought, which was like, how would you water them? Like, how does this work? And said that out loud, and that turned into an interesting exploration and conversation. And I think that it does require sometimes a little bit of the slowing down because you've got to notice what's here before you can start to get curious about how it works or why it's there in the first place. But it's a really fun exercise I've done a number of times, like just wandering around, noticing and then seeing what questions come off the things you've noticed.
Mm. So there's noticing and slowing down. And there's a couple of points I want to pick up on there, but one is I completely agree the fact that, I mean, I say communication is a muscle, and people sometimes think of it as, it's either innate, you're born with it. And especially I get so many people saying to me, oh, I'm an introvert or I'm this, and so
Mm,
I'm never going to be able to talk to anyone. I say, well, no, it's a bit like it's more like going to the gym. You have to go and you exercise that muscle, and after a while, that muscle becomes stronger. And of course, some people
mm,
have a genetic strength. They're genetically stronger. They're able to build muscle more quickly. Some people are more skinny, for instance, but
mm,
it's something you can work on. And also, if you don't work on it, you might be very good at communicating today, but if you don't communicate with anyone for a year, it's like if you don't go to the gym for a year, suddenly you're going to come back and you'll have a bit of that muscle memory and all of that. It'll probably be easier for you than someone who never got to that level of communication. But it's something you have to work on every day, every week, like
mm,
going to the gym. And then the slowing down and noticing, and particularly in this modern world, we're very, very impatient, and
mm,
we don't want to slow down. Um,
mm,
and I give the example of something which really annoys me is a certain well-known online shopping site, and they deliver things too quickly for me. I order a book or
mm.
something, and I want to wait a couple of weeks because I want to savor the expectation
Yeah.
of waiting till I can get it. But the buggers keep delivering it the next day, and I was like, I don't want it to turn up the next day. I think last year, I actually ordered a book, and it was coming from India, and so I had
Mm,
to wait. I think about 6, 7 weeks. And it was fantastic because I had that whole 6, 7 weeks of thinking, oh, I
mhm,
wonder if they sent it from the warehouse yet. And,
mhm,
so, but it's very hard to slow down and notice when you're rushing around like a headless chicken. And the digital world does encourage that sort of
mm,
constantly being distracted and constantly rushing around.
mm. Yeah, I love the outrage at Amazon or whatever it is delivering your book
Yeah.
so quickly. It makes me wonder if there's a fun creative idea around there where you can choose your how long you want to wait, and there's some reframe around like savor the moment, and then sends you like an email every day saying how's it feeling knowing that your book is arriving in 2 days time, um, or some other kind of prompt that invites, I think, the focusing more on the experience we're having and the process of how do I frame this? I think there's something very meaningful about moments that we are rushing, and in the name of efficiency and optimization. But I think the slowness and pointing to each moment as it occurs actually is much more valuable because it recreates a sense of like, wow, this moment is meaningful. And I think that's something when we're missing more and more. So just kind of fill time with more and more stuff. Actually, doing less, pointing to the slowness, and helping people savor would be much more valuable.
Yeah, and I'm thinking there with the whole um, goal and outcome and the sort of transactional nature of a lot of modern life is that
Mm,
we're all trying to get to the end to the finish line, but then we're not enjoying
yeah.
the actual race.
Mm,
And it's a bit like, the best part of your going on holiday isn't getting on the plane home and that's the end of it. The whole point is you want to go and experience each of those moments. As you said, it's those moments. But I feel a lot of us get into that habit of just kind of collecting the next thing, whatever it is,
mm,
whether it's our professional lives or our personal lives. It's this goal, just getting the next goal and the next outcome,
mm,
and then with that, the transactional nature of interaction that creates. Because, for
mm,
instance, if I'm coming into this today saying, "Oh, I really want to, I don't know, get a great video to put on my social media," I mean, okay, yes, but is that really the best way to actually achieve one, to achieve
mm,
the outcome? And then I'm going to be missing so much of the what makes life meaningful. It's not just
mm,
getting to the end, getting the outcome. It's the actual, well, that experiencing the ups and downs,
Mm.
along the path.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I resonate. I think this is there's the other person that comes to mind when we talk about this is Julia Cameron, who is the author of The Artist's Way. I don't know if you've heard of the book before.
It
It's a
rings a bell, but I
do-it-yourself.
haven't read it yet.
Okay, so it's a do-it-yourself creativity course, and it's a kind of book that a bunch of people have on their bookshelves but have never really read or opened. Which it's sad because it's a great course. I've done it 4 times now, and in
Mm,
communities, which has been fabulous. Anyway, she she talks a lot about the difference between process and product, and I think that's
mm,
her language rather than mine. I can't remember exactly. Maybe that's mine, but there's so much focus on the outcome on the product that you forget to fall in love with the process and love the process and see it like as intrinsically valuable in and of itself. And one of my biggest takeaways from doing the program again earlier this year was my last time was to stop questioning why I'm doing something and whether it needs to lead to any tangible outcomes, but just to enjoy it for what it was. Whether that be a little bit of drawing here and there, or just singing whilst cooking, or keep dancing in my kitchen, and just have fun in the moment.
and then I think we're back to the creativity there as well. With a lot of these people we celebrate, whether they are artists or scientists or um, they get into that zone. They get into that
Mm,
process, the zone, rather than the product, and then the product comes out of that
mm,
process, and we've sort of got it backwards in a way, perhaps that the process is the important part, and being in the
mm,
flow, and that's the best experience of life when you're relaxed. And it doesn't have to mean you're um, creating a great piece of art or solving the mysteries of the universe, but even well, conversation, those times where you feel
mm,
relaxed, you feel comfortable around people that resonate with you, and there's a certain magic that happens there. There's something that just sort of comes out of that space,
mm,
and it's something that's hard to force, and it's something that's hard to get to by having a goal or an outcome.
mm, mhm. Makes me wonder, are you saying that what's something that you're enjoying the process of right now and not the product?
Well, I think that perhaps I'm unusual, or perhaps I've just been lucky, but I find that many areas of my life I have been able to get obsessed with, but I would say not in an unhealthy way, but or get into the flow with. So
Mm,
originally for me it was music, playing music,
mm,
and later writing music. Um, I've just this week I've been exploring some
mm,
dance, so salsa dancing, and it's
mm,
just putting some
nice.
putting some videos on YouTube on the TV and just kind of following along. But again, it's that flow state, and I just found myself, like a child, just playing, and we don't
Mm,
allow ourselves to play and enjoy ourselves, and because also there's a humility that comes with that, and a sense of openness, like you were saying, and also not having the answer. And I feel that a lot of the time maybe we're trying to be experts, or we're trying to be knowledgeable, and we don't give the process, as you said, we don't give enough time and space. I think
mm,
space is very important. The space where it's time, or it can be physical space. So if you're rushing around in a city all the time, that can be very draining, and it can be mental space, getting out into nature. Um, but we don't give things enough space to really breathe.
mm,
We're in this fast-paced, technological society. I should say here, I'm not against technology. I use technology all the time. I'm very pro technology, but there's a danger again, because of course most technology is developed towards a certain outcome, that again
mm,
we get away from that process and from that space. So as I say, I'm lucky that I think I've been able to get into that flow state in many areas of my life. um, Even sometimes writing an email or something like that, I can let myself you know, and sometimes putting something down as well. I think that's very important as well, is knowing when to stop something or pause something and then
Mm,
come back to it later. But I would say, to sum it up, it's the allowing space for things to evolve and grow.
mm, mm. Yeah, and for the random shower thoughts to emerge as well as part of that process.
Random thoughts are good.
Yeah,
but
yeah. So the best stuff.
but then again, we're all supposed to be very focused, and but that comes from that objective and a very narrow view on life. But I mean, mm, all the special parts of life are where we get rid of that. You know, when we're
Mm,
laughing with friends, we're having a great conversation. Um, you know, dancing. There's no outcome to it. I suppose you could be dancing trying to show off or something, but you know, there's no
mm,
real. Yeah, you're not trying to achieve something. I think also survival is important here, because a lot of our life has now become connected to survival. I'm thinking education. If you think of a perhaps a more classical education or certain styles of education, they were about exploring a broad range of subjects and again being able to play with different ideas. And now things are becoming more, you know, get the certificate, get the qualification to go into this position, um, and it just becomes a very narrow linear way of
mm,
living your life.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah, 100% agree. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, why bother? Kind of why bother pursuing anything? How do I think about it? It's more about what's making me want to pursue this thing? Like, is there actually is this coming from my intrinsic curiosity or something I've been told or something like that? And being more willing to see, I think, things in an experiment as well. And I don't know if it's going to be interesting or not. I don't know what it's going to lead to or not. Um, doesn't necessarily matter always.
Well, I think there's a natural instinct there, because also there is the survival process, and that's still our driving force. And even though, if you're lucky enough to live in a fairly wealthy country, a developed country, then your survival is almost certain these days. You know, food, shelter, all that is pretty much taken care of. But there's
Mm,
still this fear in us, I think. And with that, very interestingly, is the social fear, the fear of being ostracized, the fear of being thrown
mm,
out of the group. Because, of course, for most of human history, if you upset people, you know, we lived in these small groups of whatever,
mm,
100, people. And if you upset people, it was a very real possibility that you could be ostracized, thrown out of the group, and winter comes around and you might starve, or it's going to be very hard to survive as a single person by yourself. So I think there's the physical fear of survival, there's the social fear of survival, and that social
mm,
fear also ties into, well, why are people so afraid of public speaking, for example? It's not a dangerous pursuit. People do,
mm,
I mean, people get in their cars every day and do very dangerous things all day long, and then public speaking, they freeze, because it's that social fear, that fear of being thrown out of the group. So I think there's a lot of that, and in people's ambition as well to try and elevate their status within the social group, even though your survival is fairly comfortable. I mean, you're comfortable, you've got everything you need, but then people are still driven to be ambitious, and they still have that play of the fear of being thrown out of the group and the striving to be elevated in that group. I mean, I don't know
mm.
how you perceive that, or if that's something you've noticed with your work with people, that social fear.
Yeah, I think all of the fears are exactly connected to the fear of being rejected and of being isolated and not being alone. I think it generally always comes back down to that. I mean, I'm going to be weird if I say that. I'm going to be, um, shunned from the group in somehow is assumed response. And then maybe not seeing that actually being unconventional and being a bit and playful and weird actually is something that can be a very attractive quality actually. Because people are usually very curious about that, like, oh, and it gives them permission as well to be a bit weird too.
And I'm curious here now. What was the? I mean, perhaps there wasn't one, but what was, if there was one, what was the turning point for you that made you think, okay, I need to do this work with creating these conversations and meaningful conversations? And what was the turning point there? What brought you to that point to really want to push this kind of work?
So there was a turning point, and it was around 2016. I was working full time. That was one of my first few jobs as a project manager, and I was enjoying my work, but I was noticing that somehow my joy in life had gone down and my creativity too. And I was trying to deconstruct why is this the case? And I noticed that the quality of my conversations had gone down. So they'd gone from being quite rich, intellectual, curiosity driven, having just completed a master's degree, and instead to being quite surface level, mostly chat about work. You know, where are you from? What do you do? How is work? And people didn't really seem to even care. They didn't feel genuine. And I felt like I didn't really want to repeat my elevator pitch anymore. I'm quite done with that. And I also know that I'm not my job. I'm so much more than that. And I wanted to find a way that would allow me to break out of those patterns and have more meaningful conversation because I knew that if I had that every day, life would be a lot more pleasurable. And I knew it was possible because I was having these conversations, deep, meaningful conversations every few weeks. I'd find myself in a random circumstance at a party or something. We'd be
Mhm.
delving into the meaning of life. And I thought, yeah, okay, we're here. What is it about this moment that's led to that? There must be some kind of formula or ingredients or something like that that would take us to this place. And I was determined to find out what thought that was and how to engineer it.
And I mean, so you talk about engineer. Well, before that, I just wanted to note that question of what do you do? I mean, that's always irritated me. I think, yeah, from since I started, well, since I left school or university, and because it always confused me a bit as well. I was like, well, what do you mean? What do I do? I mean, I do lots of things. I do this, I do
Mm,
that, I do all these things in my life. I play, wear many hats, play many roles.
mm,
And so now I tend to, when people ask me that, I tend to answer, tend to tell them everything that isn't professional. So I'll say, well, I like cooking, I like learning languages, I like,
mm,
and tell them everything. And then often they'll get this confused look because they're waiting for that role. They want to have
mm. Yeah.
um, that word that they can box you into. So, oh, you're there. Okay, that's where you fit in this social structure. Um, but then back to the engineering, and because I'm curious about that, because for me, I've always enjoyed conversation. I mean, since I was 5 years old, I would ask adults questions and things. Okay, what's going on here? Why do we do this? And that curiosity has really driven my conversations, the curiosity. But then also becoming a coach and learning certain techniques, models, things like that. But where would you say the interface is? Because I always worry about the danger between when I teach communication skills, for instance, there's a danger to get very use them too much as a tool and as a crutch, rather than bringing in some of those more important qualities, like say presence or curiosity. So where do you find the line there? Because you use the word engineering, and I'm wondering where the line is for you between the um, practical techniques and more of a state, a way of being, perhaps, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yes, I guess the term engineering is should be probably used quite lightly. I think it's more about the recognition that you can kind of design or influence a space to set yourself up for specific kinds of outcomes. You cultivate a culture where people feel like, for instance, they can have these kinds of conversations, but you can never truly force it. And I think that's probably a positive thing, because it actually allows for a lot of creativity, people to show up in different ways. And I find this with even teaching conversation skills as well, that there's a certain level of learning of patterns and conversation tools, scripts, all these kinds of things that's very supportive. And then there's a point where you kind of need to let it all go, and maybe trust whatever's coming through you in your unconscious, which is kind of bringing more of a improvisation theatre style, which is something I also bring into my work, because that's where the real fun, fresh stuff is. But if you want to produce great art, you still need to have an understanding, like say in jazz, of the scales. You need to be able to bring some of the form to then play around and restructure that form.
Yeah, and I mean, that reminds me of what you said about the scales. That reminds me of um, how I teach some of these things is that I'll give people a tool and I say, look, you do need to go and drill this, practice it, and until it becomes automatic. But then at the same time, there's a point where you need to improvise and you need to sort of let go of those things. So it's a bit like, yeah, you learn your scales. You learn to play an instrument, you learn all the scales, you memorize them, you can
Mm,
play them, and you learn certain pieces and memorize the pieces. But at a certain point, you've got to let go of that. And again, back is that flow state. So there is the structure there, but at the same time, um, allowing yourself to move beyond that. And now I'm
mm,
thinking about these sort of natural communicators versus people who have to learn it. Because actually, for me, although I was always interested in conversations and I was always curious, it wasn't something that came naturally to me. I was very nervous as a teenager, as a child. I found it very difficult to talk to people. I would get very embarrassed, very shy. If I was going to make a phone call, I would have to plan everything out beforehand. So it's not something that came to me naturally. But then later, I suppose in my 20s, I started reading a bit about psychology and finding some tools. And then I went out and practiced the tools. And I found, okay, this worked, but it only worked to a certain level because I found also that if there wasn't that genuine intention to understand the person, and I'd also say maybe share something or give something to that person,
mm,
whether it was knowledge or just the gift of listening to them, letting them unload some emotions. Because if it was just using the techniques, yes, you could get to a certain level, but then something strange happened.
mm,
So it's very interesting, and I'm always very cautious about that balance with people because I will teach people a certain tool and say, okay, go out and use this week with your family in your workplace. Then sometimes I have to say, okay, now it's time to drop the tool, put it down.
mm, mm. Yeah, I want to pick up on something you said actually about the natural versus learned. And I think it's important to point out that all of these skills are learned. And there isn't a natural, even people who appear as natural have been in an environment that has helped them cultivate this. And they've been modeled that kind of communication skills by other people, or had people directly teach them. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people aren't fortunate enough to get that. So rather than, thinking you're bad because you've got to learn it, I mean, I learnt a lot of the stuff that I teach as well. Like some of it was already in there, and some of it I had to go away and start again on. So there's no badness there. I mean, that's exactly what people do who become therapists and coaches, is they go and they learn how to be really good listeners. They learn how to ask good questions. This is all learnt skills. Same with salespeople. There's no shame in any of that.
And yeah, the environment. I think that's something I don't think enough about in my work. But you're right because I think of someone I know who grew up with a very big extended family, and I'm sure that helped them to learn those skills, maybe through trial and error. But they just so someone might say, "Oh, you're a natural communicator," but no, since they were a child, they were having to interact with many different people,
Mhm.
different generations of people, which makes a big difference because they have, I
Mm,
mean, different generations have different sort of buzzwords or words that resonate with them. They have different ways of expressing themselves. When you think about teenagers with the current slang, for instance, there's different ways of interacting with different generations. They have different values, different generations often. So they did learn those communication skills by being put in that environment. Um, so yeah, I think I'd agree with that, that it is all learnt, and it is the environment that shapes that ability.
Mm,
So I guess maybe as a wrap up, um, what would be one thing you would tell someone who wanted to improve in this way? And I'm not going to put a goal because we were talking about being goal oriented and outcomes and all of that. But if someone wanted to improve their conversations, let's say, improve their, maybe I have just put a goal there, but if someone wanted to improve their conversations, improve their communication, where would you start? What would you say to them to go out and
mm.
start with?
Well, I can maybe perhaps return to a point, beginning of the conversation, we started talking about curiosity. So I think that's a great way to start. And I think one tangible way to follow curiosity is to ask follow-up questions. So when people share things, we often assume that what they've shared is that's it, that's the end, that's the final thing. But actually, it's always the beginning. How people use words and language is there's so much meaning and there's so many stories in there. They're sharing a dot of their universe actually, and it's up to us to again be curious to explore. So asking them follow-up questions, what was that like? What does that mean? What made you want to do that? You can reflect back what you hear from them as well. All those things allow you to go a bit deeper.
Yeah, and I'm just smiling there because I'm thinking about um, the cause of many arguments, and that is, one person screaming at the other person, I said, you said this, and the other person screamed back, that's not what I said,
Mm,
where what they mean is that's not what I meant. It's probably they might have the words
mm,
correct, but they didn't have the meaning. And we don't
yeah.
take that time to really confirm the meaning is connected to the
Mm,
words, because we hear the words and we connect our own meaning to those words, but that's completely different from what the person was saying. And I was just teaching this last weekend, actually,
mm,
was just a little phrase, which is, it sounds like, and then summarizing, repeating back the emotion or the what you think the person was saying, and how by
mm,
just doing that, you can, because most people, they'll just listen and they'll hear the first um, iteration, I suppose, and then by
mm,
bouncing that back, you actually hone in on what they're really saying, what they're
mm,
really saying behind the words. So
mm,
yeah, that resonates very strongly.